Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban was released in 2004 and was directed by Alfonso Cuarón and based on the third book in the popular children's series by J.K. Rowling and stars Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, and Emma Watson, and this time follows Harry Potter, Ron, and Hermione during their third year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where they delve into the mystery surrounding an escaped prisoner who poses a dangerous threat to the young wizard. Prisoner of Azkaban is one of my personal favorites among the Harry Potter films as well as the books, and that seems to be a common sentiment held by many people, and there truly is a ton to love about this film, especially when it comes to the filmmaking and character development. Prisoner of Azkaban is also an important part of this franchise as it marks the point of no return for the series, where it becomes something far different from what the first two films started out as, for better or for worse. Nonetheless, Prisoner of Azkaban is a great film that really pushed the series into a direction that it tried to maintain for the rest of the series. This is sadly where the inconsistencies with this franchise begin, and there are many factors to this. One obvious one is the change in director. The look and overall vibe of the series began to change as well. Even the music changed. It was clear that Harry Potter was growing up. So with this one, gone is the warmth of the coziness of the first two films as we make way for a bleaker and more modern wizarding world. Nonetheless, despite all the inconsistencies with this film from the two that came before, I still think we got a great film that improves upon many things from the previous two films, but also just doesn't hold the same kind of magic that came before. On its own, this truly is a great film, especially when it comes to an adaptation of a children's book. So, before we get into my thoughts on the film, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. For this particular film, the production ran much longer than the previous two films, switching to an 18-month cycle to give the film the time it required. Some of this was brought about in part to the change in director from Chris Columbus to Alfonso Cuarón, who is very much a perfectionist when it comes to his craft and consistently changed his mind on what he wanted the film to be while on set. By the time the movie finished filming, Cuarón himself was even unsure what kind of tone the film would take and if it would be consistent with what came before, or something else entirely. However, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, after Columbus finished up on Chamber of Secrets, he stepped down as director as he wanted to spend more time with his family, who he would be separated from while filming in the UK. He would, however, remain on as a producer on this film as he thought it would give him the necessary time with his children and he wouldn't have to appear on set every day. Before Cuarón was picked, there were several other choices to take the position, including Guillermo del Toro, who envisioned a different kind of film and felt the first two films were too bright and happy and full of light. Other filmmakers such as Mark Forrester and M. Night Shyamalan were even considered. Eventually, Warner Brothers conducted a shortlist which included Callie Corey, Kenneth Branagh, who previously starred as Gilderoy Lockhart, and lastly, Alfonso Cuarón. Eventually, Warner Brothers conducted a shortlist which included Callie Corey, Kenneth Branagh, who previously starred as Gilderoy Lockhart, and lastly, Alfonso Cuarón. Cuarón was initially not interested in directing as he had never read the books or seen the films, but his good friend Del Toro is the one that got him to give them a chance. It was only after reading the series that he changed his mind and signed on to direct. Cuarón was chosen by Rowling and Heyman after being impressed with his previous films and felt that tonally and stylistically he would be a perfect fit for the series. Cuarón's first exercise for the actors was for them to each write an essay in the first person on their characters to try to see how they understood their characters. Funny enough, Daniel Radcliffe would submit a paper that was 2 pages, while Emma Watson submitted a 10-page paper and Rupert Grint submitted nothing at all, believing Ron wouldn't even do the assignment, which gave Cuarón the confidence that his actors knew their characters well. For this film, Cuarón wanted to establish a more mature tone in both the costumes and sets. Hogwarts this time around was made to be more contemporary. To pull this off, Cuarón studied English schools and witnessed the individuality of each student, and wanted the same for the student characters, having each one wear their uniform the way they believed they would wear it. Costume changes also included the use of modern-day clothing when the students weren't in class and on their own personal time. A stark contrast from the first 2 films, which rarely did this. Janie Timmy joined the film this time around as the costume designer and eventually worked on the following installments in the series, so going forward we'll be seeing her designs quite a lot. As for Hogwarts, it would have a larger scope than previously done and be grounded in the real world. The scale model of the castle's exterior was expanded upon, and Stuart Craig, who worked as the art director on the previous 2 films, added areas such as the clock tower and courtyard, which were new inclusions to the series. Other sets that were made for the film included Hogsmeade Village and the Shrieking Shack. The use of real-life locations also changed the landscape around the castle, including Hagrid's hut, which was added on to, as well as now being set on the side of a hill. Other sets from the previous film were reused as well as redesigned to create whole new locations for the film. Filming began on February 24, 2003 at Leavesden Film Studios and wrapped in November of that year. And unlike the first 2 films, there was an extensive use of real-life locations. Michael Sarasis was hired as the director of photography this time around, and due to the darker nature of the film's story compared to the previous 2 installments, opted for moody lighting and shadow, and ended up using a variety of wide-angle lenses to amplify Hogwarts. As for changes that would be made to the story, Rowling gave Cuarón permission to make minor changes to the books on the condition that he stuck to the book's spirit, which shows in a ton of creative liberties taken that might make some book purists mad, but if I can interject with my own opinion here, I don't think these changes harm the film itself. As for the special effects, ILM and Framestore handled the visual effects. Originally, Cuarón wanted to move away from CGI and towards puppetry. A practical Dementor was created for the film and placed underwater, but the method was too impractical. But the footage was used for the visual effects team to get an idea for the movement Cuarón was looking for. The music for the film was done once again by John Williams, who contributed his 3rd and final score for the series. However, it ended up being a significant departure from his work on the previous 2 films, as Cuarón wanted the score to be set apart from what came before. A song was written for the film, Double Trouble, which would be performed by a choir in the Hogwarts Great Hall. The lyrics were taken from William Shakespeare's Macbeth, and the track actually ends up being more or less the main theme for this film. Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban had its premiere on May 23, 2004, and was the first film in the franchise to be released in IMAX theaters, and even broke the record in the UK for the biggest single day at the box office, making £5.3 on a Monday. It went on to break several records and made a total of $797.7 million, making it the 2nd highest grossing film in 2004, right behind Shrek 2. However, despite its successful box office, the film is currently the 3rd lowest grossing film of the larger Wizarding World franchise. The film would go on to be a critical success, as well as holding a cinema score of an A on a scale from A+ to F, and was quickly lauded as one of the best films in the franchise, an opinion that is still recognized even today. The film also, I think, helped in really pushing Alfonso Cuarón into the mainstream, as he is now considered one of the most prolific directors working today. Now, with all that out of the way, let's finally talk about my own thoughts on the film. At the start of this video, I briefly mentioned that Prisoner of Azkaban is among my favorite Harry Potter movies. For the longest time, I would have even put it as number 1. But this most recent rewatch revealed something to me I never would have thought possible. Of the 3 films I've reviewed so far on these recent revisits of this franchise, I actually prefer the first one over this one. It's weird saying that because only a couple years ago, when I originally attempted to review these movies, I rated the first film lower than this one, and now that's just not the case anymore. I still love this film, and my appreciation for it has only grown as I've gotten older, but there's just something in that first film that's missing in this one, and the entire franchise at this point, and we'll get into that in a bit. First off, let's talk about all the stuff I love in this film. When watching this one of the first things that pops to mind for me, other than the change in the look and tone of the film, is how they focus a lot more on character this time around. That's not to say the first 2 films were devoid of any character. That's just untrue. But Prisoner of Azkaban ends up being far more character-focused than its predecessors, especially when it comes to our main character, Harry. Now, for any book fans out there, the third book also does this, and this is definitely the point in the franchise where the stories begin to get a bit more complex. The previous 2 films have had Harry learn about himself, and that's still true in this film, but now we add on top of that him learning about his family and his connection with them and the people they knew and connected with. Harry also has to deal with a lot more troubles in his past that are a little more complicated than even Voldemort. We learn in the film that the escaped prisoner Sirius Black is Harry's godfather and supposedly sold out his parents to Voldemort and had them killed. There's a great moment where Harry, in a fit of rage, makes the decision that if he ever comes across Black, he will kill him. I think this story is really built around challenging Harry on a deeply emotional level, and I think it prepares him more than ever for the trials he will eventually face later on in the series. Also, Daniel Radcliffe kills it in this film as Harry Potter. This is his best performance in the series at this point, and honestly, the same can be said for all the young cast in this one. There's little touches in this film I really love that give the characters so much personality and feel like good friends. There's camaraderie between classmates that just wasn't present before, and they end up feeling like real people. A great example of what I'm talking about is Harry's first night back to Hogwarts. All of his friends are in their dormitory eating these snacks that cause them to make the sounds of any kind of animal. This is a movie-only edition, but Alfonso Cuarón really gets across that school-like feel he was going for, even down to the way characters wear their robes in the film. The other 2 best additions to this film are the casting of David Thewlis as Remus Lupin and Gary Oldman as Sirius Black. These 2 are incredible and bring a real presence and weight to the film, and are just the 2 best supporting players in this film. Lupin is this strange, drabby, reclusive, but highly intelligent wizard that acts as the defense against the dark arts teacher in this film, and it's his mentorship of Harry that is the beating heart of the movie. Lupin acts as this step down from Dumbledore, as a grown-up that really understands Harry and can provide him with some great support. Lupin instantly has this connection with Harry because he went to school with his mother and father, and in fact was really good friends with his father James. It gives Harry, at least for the moment, the closest he's ever gotten to a father figure. I love their conversations around the Hogwarts grounds, talking about the days in which Harry's parents were alive, and the kind of people that they were, and how Harry is so much like them. Not to mention, we have what's probably my favorite scene in the film, where Lupin teaches Harry the Patronus charm, which works as a way to fend off the main obstacles of the film, the Dementors, which we'll talk about more later. We still have to talk about Gary Oldman as Sirius Black, though. This is just one of my favorite characters in this franchise, books or movies, and Oldman was the absolute best choice in my mind to play this character. Oldman is one of my favorite actors, period, and he can play Black as a horrible, sinister, and conniving person, or a gentle, good-hearted father figure. I love how we spend this whole film believing Black to be the film's main antagonist, only to reveal this man who was sentenced to Azkaban prison for 12 years is an innocent man, and a good man at that. The scene of him and Harry just talking about maybe after everything is set right, they could live together, it gives Harry that hope of a father figure that he's always wanted, and just brilliantly acted on top of that. Now, let's talk about the Dementors. These things are extremely creepy. Their design is like something from a nightmare, and in fact reminds me a lot of visual depictions of the Grim Reaper, which makes sense as they are meant to represent these almost harbingers of death, suffering, and fear. Their introduction aboard the Hogwarts Express is absolutely chilling to watch, and the way they just glide around, the cold breath they let out, it's a very effective scene, and watching them as they feed on their victims, leaving someone with no happiness or warmth, they're just so interesting to me. And so it's because of this, Lupin helps Harry defend himself against them by learning the Patronus charm. These things are a real threat to Harry in this film because of the horrors that are in his past, and when he is attacked by these things, he is left hearing the voice of his mother screaming at the time of her death. It's really haunting stuff. I also have to talk about the entire climax of this film. From the moment we enter the Shrieking Shack to Harry facing off against the Dementors, we are met with some of my favorite moments in the franchise. The face-off in the Shrieking Shack where Harry, Ron, and Hermione finally come face-to-face with Sirius is treated with such importance and tension, especially when, for a second, it looks as if Lupin is in cahoots with him. But we soon learn of Sirius's innocence and that the real person that betrayed Harry's parents was actually Peter Pettigrew, a wizard that was also friends with Harry's dad, and the person that Sirius was sent to Azkaban for reportedly killing all those years ago. We learn that he's alive and has been living as Ron's rat Scabbers ever since. We then get a crazy scene where Lupin even turns into a werewolf, but things really get interesting when Harry is by the lake trying to save Sirius as they are being attacked by Dementors, and just when all hope might be lost, he's saved by a figure that conjures their own Patronus to ward off the Dementors, and he believes it to be his dad. Then we get this cool scene of Harry and Hermione going back in time, as it's revealed Hermione has been using a time turner throughout the whole movie, allowing her to take multiple classes throughout the year. But this allows them to cause a chain of events that leads them to saving not only Sirius Black from death, but the Hippogriff Buckbeak as well. And it's finally revealed that the person that saved Harry and Sirius on the lake was Harry himself. There's plenty of other scenes throughout the movie I love, such as the Double Trouble song being sung in the Great Hall, the multiple Dumbledore speeches that bring such weight to the scenes, the moment where the divination professor, Trelawney, has a premonition of an event that we won't get to until the next film, and so much more that if I talked about them all, this review would just be too long. Now, before we get into some of my criticisms and the weird shift in the series that starts in this film, I also need to bring up the cinematography. This movie on its own looks great. The shot selection is beautiful. The camera movement, great. It's a very pretty film, and despite having muted colors this time around, it's honestly not as drastic as I remember it being. Compared to the second film, which muted its colors only slightly, this does that a lot more. I also have to bring up the music for the film. This would be the last time John Williams would work for the series, and his music is definitely missed after this one. However, Prisoner of Azkaban is unique in that it uses the same composer, but has very little to do melodically with the previous two films, which is disappointing, but regardless, the music here is truly something special, and I think hits the tone this movie was going for perfectly. Window into the Past might very well be my favorite Harry Potter track, period. I also want to briefly bring up Michael Gambon as Albus Dumbledore. For obvious reasons, following the death of Richard Harris, they recast the role of Dumbledore with Michael Gambon, and though he's far from my ideal vision for the character, I think he ends up doing a very good job in this film. He lacks the same presence that Harris had, but he makes Dumbledore more of his own by definitely playing more into the character's wittier side. But with that said, let's get into some of my criticisms. You might actually be surprised, especially with how much I've built up the anticipation for this section here, but there's not much in the way of things I find glaringly wrong with the film. Although I will admit I absolutely hate the final shot of this film of Harry's face speeding towards the camera. It's just an ugly image, especially with how elegantly and grand the previous films and the films that followed would have for their endings. And this is just personal taste for me, but I think it's near this point with the whole modern aesthetic that the film ends up losing a bit of the magic that was in those first two films, and especially that first film. Now, pretty much all I have to say now is something that's just down to personal taste, and it will touch on a problem I have with the series moving forward, and that is its total inconsistency as a franchise. Every film after the first two feels so different from what came before. Even when we get to the David Yates films, he's inconsistent with his own style, and it makes the rest of the franchise after this just very odd. As a whole, Prisoner of Azkaban works great, but it's when placed against the rest of the franchise, this is where the problems start when it comes to vision. Cuarón is an auteur filmmaker. He practically owns the films he makes, and Prisoner of Azkaban feels like a great Cuarón Harry Potter film, but when compared to the first two, the styles clash so much that Azkaban feels like a reboot of the franchise. This doesn't dampen my enjoyment of the film, but it's something that's always at the back of my mind that very little of these films moving forward try to maintain a consistency that permeates through the whole franchise, which I think hurts them as a whole, not necessarily individually. I hope that makes sense to everybody because at the end of the day, I do love this film, but I think it should serve as a lesson for adaptations or just franchises in the future that consistency matters. It's a weird comparison to go from Harry Potter to this, but look at the MCU. Regardless of how you feel about it, there is a consistency with the look and feel of many of their movies. There's some films where the director's style does push through, but they all work together seamlessly and end up feeling like they could have all been directed by the same person. I feel like that's what the Harry Potter franchise needed more control over, but that's just me. This is still a great film, and one of the best in the franchise. I love how it challenges the characters. I love the look and feel and direction, at least when looking at this movie. And the music is, once again, absolutely phenomenal to listen to. So, with all that said, I'm going to give Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban an 8 out of 10. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. What are your thoughts on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban? And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And stay positive.